Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, to Tubs of the Club, the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Alice Hammer. It's the dynamic duo today, joined by Brian Marceau. Brian.
We're already just off to the smoothest start we've had the entire year. So amateur hours here, dudes. Doing great here in Coeur d'Alene. If you are watching live, you can see that producer Martin Heemstra is not here, but we have his homage behind us as our background, which Dallas's rectangle is cutting out. So Martin, will be stoked for you to be here when you are more production going on. Martin, when you're back, we'll be stoked to see more producing and seducing, but we'll have to deal with us two for the night, which is kind of a throwback. Dallas and I first did our recordings really during basketball season of the COVID year, and no one wants to relive that, but you're stuck with it for the night.
All I can think about is the oodles and boodles of pristine bitches we're going to get from this. Anyways, before we get into Around the Bar brought to us by Hughes River Expedition, I just wanted to quickly mention the Eastern game. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Martin, for doing the reaction to that, as I had some family stuff going on, couldn't make the show. And then I got called into work on Sunday at 2:15 in the morning. So was not able to make any reactions, but there wasn't really a whole lot to go off of other than Hayden Hatton having an all-time Vandal performance and Eastern getting the absolute shit kicked out of them. Like you'd said, Brian, you take away those two major plays and Talkington has 82 yards. Absolute just blow up from the Vandal team here on all phases. Absolutely destroyed Eastern. So nice to have the get right game.
Yeah, Hayden Hatton's Big Sky Player of the Week for those 4 touchdowns and 10 catches.
Yeah, and very, very, very well deserved. Unfortunate he wasn't able to get the full record at 5. Had to settle for a tie of the record with 4 touchdown catches last week. But what do you do? I guess you hope for 5 another day. Anyways, we've buried the lead here, guys. Let's just jump right into it. We're talking about this week's game against UC Davis. The Aggies are 5-4. They're 4-2 in the Big Sky Conference. They have blowout wins against, honestly, 5 complete dog shit teams. NAU, UNC, Cal Poly, ISU, so the 4 of the absolute worst teams in the conference, as well as a blowout win against San Diego. They did lose close to Weber State, and interestingly enough, the current number 1 team in the country, South Dakota State. I almost said San Diego State because it's late. It's real late, guys. They also had a blowout loss to Montana State. So, Brian, before we even just start getting into UC Davis and what we know about them, just looking at this team, can you make anything out of the fact that, yes, they're 4-2 in conference, but they've played 4 of the worst teams in the conference, including the 3 unquestioned worst teams in this conference they've blown apart?
What we can take away from this team is they're clearly not, this is going to be really earth-shattering, dudes. They're not terrible. We know that for a fact. It's unclear exactly how much those close losses early in the season mean because of Weber State kept UC Davis in that game with dumb mistakes, and Weber State fans will tell you that. But hey, the game was still close, and Weber State is a good football team. South Dakota State took a little bit of time to really get their offense humming this season. First couple of weeks, Mark Gronowski did not look like the very good, maybe, top 10 percentile FCS quarterback that we know him to be. It took him a little bit of time, but hey, UC Davis still kept that game close. So, Idaho fans talk about good losses early in the season. UC Davis does have those to hang their hats on. I know, like, my big takeaways from this team are more a little bit in how the team produces, which, and again, asterisk, of course, it's against the shittiest teams. Because I guess maybe the most recent barometer for Davis against a good team is they did get their asses kicked at Montana State 41-24. But Montana State's also undefeated in Big Sky play. Montana State right now looks like they're probably going to tie with Sacramento State and share the Big Sky title, with both teams going 8-0, obviously not playing each other. But I guess the first direction I'd look at with understanding who UC Davis is, like, to answer the question, good or not good, whatever it is, this is clearly a team that on the offensive end, they certainly can produce. And, you look at that quarterback play in the Big Sky Conference. Miles Hastings, starting quarterback for UC Davis, who at the start of the year, none of us really had super high opinions of Miles Hastings. Well, if you're a Vandal fan who thinks Giovanni McCoy has looked pretty dang good and been pretty dang efficient because he has, well, Miles Hastings has not been that different in the kind of production he has. Leads the Big Sky in passing yards per game, 12 touchdowns, 2 picks, 73% completion percentage. So Hastings has absolutely been one of the 2 most effective quarterbacks in the Big Sky. So I guess that's where I would start about, hey, what do we know about Davis? We know offensively they put up some points on the board, and we know they can hurt you both through the air and on the ground. Dallas.
Yep, I'm there. Sorry. I clicked mute in the wrong spot. Oof, rough. I went back and listened to a couple old episodes and noticed when I hit the mute button on my microphone, you can hear it. So I hit the mute button in StreamYard and then forgot where the mute button in StreamYard was. So
see, that's exactly why I had my 2-minute marathon mute. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, look, we have some live listeners. We're trying to purge them with a long discussion about how to mute. But circling back, Dallas, Davis offensively is strong. There isn't really a way to discuss this team without emphasizing that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you mentioned Miles Hastings, and while none of us maybe had super high thoughts of him from how his play was last year, he was one of the few guys that returned from last year to start again in the Big Sky Conference. A lot of folks, there's my wife throwing shit at me in the YouTube comments. So if you're not listening to this live, you really should be. If you're listening to this on a podcast, at about the 9-minute mark, well, once I cut the audio off, it's probably closer to the 7-minute mark. You're just going to see my face just go completely white as my wife is just throwing shit at me here in the comments. So we're going to just power through that. Again, Miles Hastings, returning starter, not many of those guys in the Big Sky this year. He actually is among the top in just about every single category in the Big Sky. He's second in total completions, third in attempts, first in completion percentage. He's even above Giovanni McCoy after the last few weeks. He's first in yards with 2,535. He's third in touchdowns with 19. He's second in passing efficiency with 155.3. But Brian, the thing that makes me question just a little bit of his stats, 1,274 yards and 11 touchdowns came in the last 4 weeks against NAU, Northern Colorado, Cal Poly, and Idaho State, where he absolutely blew the doors off of teams. So, yes, his numbers look great, but underlying, if you look at it, he's put up a bunch of stats against some pretty awful teams, and the other half of his stats came in 5 games, not 4 games. When you average it out a little bit, they're not quite as jaw-dropping as you'd think, which makes sense because Ulonzo Gilliam at running back, one of the best running backs, honestly, in the history of the conference. He was the 2022 preseason Big Sky MVP, years of all conference accolades. He's the guy that does everything. He leads the team in rushing. He's second in receiving. That's where I want to kick it to you, Brian. Should Idaho be more concerned about Miles Hastings' arm or Ulonzo Gilliam's legs this weekend?
Based off when Idaho's defense has looked less effective throughout the season, clearly Gilliam is the guy that I'm most concerned with. Gilliam is, to me, the second best running back in conference. Idaho's already seen the best running back in conference. That's Cameron Scadaboo at Sacramento State. But Gilliam is definitely the number 2 running back, both in my mind, but in Big Sky yards per game, 119 yards per game, 7 touchdowns, 6.2 yards per rush. Gilliam is also a threat through the air. Now he's not top 20 in the league or anything in terms of receiving yards, but Gilliam is certainly he's a pass catcher who can hurt you. He's averaging just under 30 yards per game as a receiver too. So when Idaho has looked less effective for spurts defensively this year, which is really some narrow windows, Dallas. Never mind. The Sacramento State game was not a narrow window. Sacramento State is, I guess, the comparison I give. I don't think UC Davis is as good as Sacramento State, but Gilliam is the only running back Idaho has faced in FCS play who you would compare to Scadaboo in terms of quality. And he also has an additional dynamic of being a good pass catcher. Dan Hawkins' team have put points up on the board. Offensive coordinator, good Lord, what's Dan Hawkins' kid's name, Dallas? Cody Hawkins. Yeah,
You
Cody
could have just
Hawkins.
said nepotism, or you could have called him Mason. That would have worked too.
Okay, well, that would have worked, but look, different than Northern Colorado, where Max McCaffrey has absolutely no idea what's going on. Cody Hawkins looks like as a coach, he may be effective. He replaced Tim Plow, who went to Boise State. Tim Plow was quite effective at UC Davis, not so much at Boise State, but Cody Hawkins has looked pretty good in his time, his very short amount of time as offensive coordinator. So on the ground is really the place that I think Idaho needs to be able to for sure slow UC Davis, because Idaho's been effective at forcing turnovers in the past game. We lead the Big Sky in interceptions. We just saw against Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington is not a bad passing team, and they have some strong receivers, and Idaho shut them down. So I do believe that you're right. The key to this game, though, Miles Hastings is a dude to know. He's a guy who can be effective. Ulonzo Gilliam's probably the X factor on the UC Davis side.
Yeah, certainly. That's the thing with Gilliam is he has more receptions than any of their other receivers. He's the guy that does everything for their team. Their offense is split just about 50-50 in passing and running, but Gilliam again has more receptions than anybody else on the team. So obviously everything goes through him. Even his backup, Lan Larison he's actually a kid from Caldwell. He was second team All Big Sky last year as a kick returner. He's only got 50 carries, but he's got 50 carries for 383 yards and 3 touchdowns. So the running game there is very strong, even if Gilliam for some reason is on the sideline for a drive or even just a couple plays. It starts with the offensive line for me. Jake Parks and Connor Pettick were both named to the All Big Sky preseason team. That's the right guard and their center. Now, Parks has only played in 1 game this year, which is good, I guess, if you're Idaho. However, just looking at their offensive line, it's filled with a bunch of depth and a bunch of guys that have played a bunch. Nick Amoa is a senior that's started 20-some games for them. They have a line that is loaded with talent, and that really helps them because they don't, Brian, like you said, they don't have a whole bunch of receivers. They're really deep. There's 10 different guys that have double-digit catches this year, but there's nobody that's like outwardly exploding like a Hayden Hatton or Jermaine Jackson, where both of those guys are in the top categories of the conference. Leading their team is CJ Hutton. He's their slot receiver, 343 yards, 4 touchdowns, 36 receptions. Pretty good numbers, but we're talking top 25 in the conference in those numbers instead of being top 5 or top 10. So that's definitely, again, if you're Idaho, you're trying to shut down Gilliam. You'll have to also watch out for the tight end, McCallan Castles. He's been All Big Sky in the past. He's got 294 yards and 2 touchdowns. Again, not a whole lot of like guys that pop off the page receiving, but again, you're talking about 10 guys with 10 different catches. This is a group that just rotates guys in and out constantly.
There's also Trey Tompkins, who he's kind of he's a gadget player for UC Davis, where he sometimes takes direct snaps under center.
Trent Tompkins.
Thank you. Trent Hopkins, my bad, dudes. Trent Hopkins, he's used in the way that a lot of people thought Zach Borisch might be used for Idaho this season, where he's a slash player, takes direct snaps. He has thrown passes. He's also catches passes as well. I want to shift back to Gilliam, though, for a second, and your talk about the offensive line, because one of the questions you had to frame this was, okay, UC Davis beats the shit out of terrible teams, but what about teams that don't suck? Gilliam's produced against some good teams this year. Like a couple stat lines to look at real quick is, again, opening game against Cal. That's Pac-12, Power 5 Cal. Gilliam rushed 14 times for 115 yards. Against Montana State, when UC Davis got their asses kicked, Gilliam 24 rushes, 127 yards, and a touchdown, as well as 4 catches for 23 yards. Against Weber State, another strong defensive team, Gilliam 17 rushes for 111 yards, as well as 5 catches for 35 yards. So look, even against good defensive competition, FCS level, and look, I mean, Cal relative to an FCS team, you would say they're strong defensively. Gilliam's been able to produce, which circles back to me, Dallas, that key to this game in my mind is how well or how much Idaho can bottle up Ulonzo Gilliam. Idaho has looked strong against the rush for most games this season, for sure. The big blemish is the Sacramento State game, giving up 300 yards. And Sacramento State's a more effective rushing team than UC Davis, but UC Davis and Big Sky play. Look, they're towards the top. They're a very effective rushing team. And Dan Hawkins, certainly, look, if we can point this out about what areas where Idaho can be exploited or has been exploited for stretches, on the ground is probably where you'd say a guy like Dan Hawkins is going to say Davis is going to have to be effective here to set up the pass play for Miles Hastings, because Idaho's been effective at forcing turnovers. Idaho's been effective against some quarterbacks in the Big Sky who are relatively solid, like RJ Martinez for NAU looked terrible playing against Idaho. We just saw Gunnar Talkington -2 broken plays look like he did not belong in the FCS. It's not shocking to think Idaho could be effective against Miles Hastings, but if Gilliam is able to cut us up, then that really isn't going to matter quite as much.
Exactly. The stats here are slightly misleading. If you look at just the overall season, Idaho's run defense is actually third in the Big Sky, allowing 120 yards a game. But that's also buttressed by the fact that Idaho played teams like Portland State that just don't particularly run the ball well or at all. You had Elijah Dotson from UNC put up decent numbers on the ground in a game that Idaho struggled a bit in the first half. And then, like you said, Brian, 300 yards to Asher O'Hara and Cameron Scadaboo. Now that's obviously a completely different situation. Somebody in the Big Sky Podcast Network, I will not mention the names just in case anybody gets flamed for it, but basically said that Sac State just runs a fancy triple option, and that's really what it is with O'Hara out there. I don't know if I quite believe that, but that is the kind of running output that they put out. So it's been seen that Idaho can be gashed on the ground. To me, this is the strength versus weakness here. If Idaho's defense has a weakness, I would say that they're susceptible to high talents at the opposing running back position. And obviously UC Davis has the second best running back in the conference. So this is a really terrifying matchup to me, because there is absolutely every chance that Gilliam could go off for 200 yards here. And Idaho's season that looks like right now, again, if Idaho wins this game, guys, playoffs are basically locked. A bye might be on the table. A first round home game is probably pretty locked in. If you beat UC Davis, you're going to beat Idaho State next week. So this is the game here. You have to win this game. And the UC Davis offense doesn't scare me too much. I don't think Miles Hastings is going to have an incredible game against Idaho's secondary. They've done like Brian, like you said, Gunnar Talkington at under 100 yards if you take out the 2 broken plays. However, Ulonzo Gilliam absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah, so Miles Hastings, we looked at the Gilliam stats against better teams. Miles Hastings stats against the better teams, they're not terrible. Like, he's shown he can make mistakes against better defenses. Went 32 of 50 against Cal through 2 picks. Against Montana State, Hastings goes 20 of 34 for 220 yards, which is not awful, but not shockingly efficient. Threw a pick, no touchdowns. Against Weber State, Hastings 39 of 57 for 256 yards, 256 yards on 57 attempts. Not great numbers exactly. So I guess your point about Hastings is right. Of maybe it's safe to call Hastings productive, but still at the level of solid, but not. He's not going to win any national awards, or Miles Hastings certainly shouldn't win any national awards. He's a guy. If he's playing well, he can't hurt you for sure. But we've also seen him be less effective against the better teams. So I guess I don't disagree exactly with what you're saying. So I guess if I'm going to pivot to now, the Idaho end of this. Idaho on the ground. Well, not just on the ground, just Idaho offensively. They're able to just they iced out Eastern again. This is the 3rd or 4th game Idaho's had the ball for 42 minutes and 18 seconds. And you have got to expect for Jason Eck, that's going to be one of the goals again, is can UC Davis has produced very well offensively, especially the second half of the season. If Idaho can ice them out, it doesn't matter. And Eck's been able to do that against not just bad teams, but against teams like Montana. Montana's a very good football team. Montana's a team ranked higher than UC Davis in things like Sagarin and in the national polls. Montana's a team that right now is considered a step ahead of UC Davis relative to getting to the playoffs. And Idaho beat Montana on the road before Montana lost their starting quarterback as well. So I guess Idaho being effective, we talk about UC Davis on the ground, Idaho being effective on the ground to set up McCoy, who, not trying to bounce too many topics, Dallas, but man, the Eastern game, I got to stress this. McCoy's long balls looked very good against Eastern. McCoy is certainly, look, he got over that Sacramento State game where he was off a bit, and he looked like the same guy he's been for most of the season last week against Eastern. But using the run to set up the pass, to me, is going to, that's been one of the go-to things for Idaho this entire season, Dallas. And I expect that's going to be one of the things that's effective for Idaho, with the understanding, though, that if McCoy's playing well, Jason, that can be flexible play calling wise, which is something he's done throughout the season.
Well, and like you said, it all starts with using the run to set up the pass. Because as you said, McCoy did have a very good game statistically, but the start of that Eastern game at least had me a little bit worried. He was missing throws, threw a couple picks there. Obviously, the first pick happened, and then the wheels got back under him, and he chucks 4 touchdowns. And then the second of his picks was him just trying to feed it to Hatton to get the 5th one. I wasn't too worried about that, but absolutely there was an instance of the run game has to be successful, the play action has to work, and that's what gets McCoy into the positions where he absolutely shreds teams when he's given the opportunity. Now, I still don't know if McCoy is the guy that's going to go out there and throw the ball 50 times and lead you to a victory, but in the way that Idaho has set up this offense to be primarily ground focused and then let McCoy chuck a couple bombs over the top of the defense once they start stacking the box, it works out really well. And especially, I think it's going to work out really well against the UC Davis team that is just kind of in the middle of the conference in their rushing numbers. They allow 158.2 yards a game. That's 6th out of 12 teams in the Big Sky. So pretty average run defense, which I think sets up really well for a team that again is going to be looking to do the exact same thing they've done in every other game, which is chew the clock, run the ball, take the shots when they count, and hopefully you get out with a win that way. Something that makes me a little bit curious here, Brian, is there's a lot of depth here, and there's not a whole lot of guys that are getting to the quarterback a ton. They have a couple guys with a sack here and there, but overall this defense doesn't scream like disruptive to me. They're certainly good, don't get me wrong, but I wonder how much of the yardage totals are adjusted in the fact that, again, they have played the three worst teams in the conference, and then NAU seems like they can play up to Sam Houston one week, and then they could possibly lose to Idaho State the next.
Well, I think, honestly, look, if we're trying to extrapolate from performance, we can do the same thing we did with Idaho heading into Sacramento State, which is we acknowledged Idaho's rush defense numbers heading into Sacramento State. That was certainly aided by the schedule. Look, UC Davis defensively has been okay. And look, you hit it. They did play some tough teams earlier in the season, but they've had a month now of bottom of the Big Sky Conference teams, and their defensive numbers are middle of the pack-ish. So I don't exactly see the one thing UC Davis has done relatively well is they've picked off 8 passes in Big Sky play. That's tied for second. Idaho leads with 10 picks in Big Sky play. So Davis has been able to force turnovers. So that, I guess, that as always, when good teams play each other, turnovers absolutely matter. But I'm not, unlike you, I guess I'm not that anxious about the influence the UC Davis team is going to have, especially look, a weakness Idaho's had is pass protection for McCoy and making sure McCoy has enough time so he can make his reads and deliver those passes that when we know he has time, he's effective doing. I'm not convinced UC Davis. Well, actually, let me say different. I am convinced UC Davis isn't Montana. I don't think they're going to be like Sacramento State either defensively. So I do think there's a matchup where Idaho offensively, which is they seem to be getting better every week, Dallas. Look, Idaho scores 48 against Eastern. I don't think this was a particularly great offensive performance for Idaho. In the second half, Idaho wasn't trying to run it up to 50 or 60 points. The Vandal team seems like they very easily could have scored 60 or 70 against Eastern if they would have kept the pedal to the floor, which clearly Idaho did not. So, on paper, this is this game matters a ton to both of these teams because Davis has to win out if they're going to make the playoffs. There's no option B. For Idaho, winning out guarantees the playoffs, and a second good win for Idaho means a lot as far as us feeling safe heading into the dumpster fire of Idaho State to close out the season. But I guess I'm like you in that, though there's reasons to look at UC Davis and understand why this is at least a solid football team, Idaho's been playing very well. And offensively, the team just looks like they get a little bit better every single week. Seems like McCoy gets a little bit more comfortable every single week. And as that happens, picking how Idaho is going to beat you becomes a bit of a problem because look at Eastern. Look, Eastern's terrible defensively for sure. But Idaho rotated, shredding Eastern through the air and on the ground. And is Davis going to be better defensively than Eastern? Well, duh, because everyone is except Cal Poly maybe. But I also don't think this Davis team, unless Idaho turns the ball over, which Idaho's been good at not doing that this season, I don't think this UC Davis defense is going to be enough to have me anxious about this game.
I would agree with you, but I do have to call out redshirt freshman Rex Connors. He's their boundary safety. He is the kind of guy that does make me a little bit nervous for this because Jackson and Hatton, what they have a tendency to do is get behind the safety, and that's how they make teams pay. Connors is, again, their boundary safety. He's got 4 interceptions, leads the team. He's also got 4 pass breakups. So he's 7th in the conference in tackles, tied for 2nd in the conference in interceptions, and tied for 7th in total passes defense in the conference. He's a fringe all Big Sky talent there, and he's one of the better safeties that Idaho's played this year. And that is the one thing that makes me a little bit nervous from their defense. But like you said, I just don't see anybody here that's a game wrecker. I don't know how this defense keeps up with Idaho's offense in the way that it's been performing against better teams. Nothing against UC Davis, but Sacramento State, better team. Montana, probably a better team if they're healthy. If Lucas Johnson is around and Chris Brown is not, probably on a neutral field, probably has the advantage there. I just don't, and maybe this is just hubris, and maybe I just don't understand how to properly gauge a team when I think that Idaho actually can go in and win and should win. But Brian, I'm not terrified by this team yet. And I think part of that comes down to the fact that this is maybe the first time that Idaho has ever matched up against Dan Hawkins, and it hasn't been an outright, holy shit, Hawkins is so much better of a coach than the other guy. This is the first time, maybe in my entire life, that I feel like Idaho's head coach is a sharp enough guy and the coaching staff is talented enough to be able to keep up with Dan Hawkins.
There's a couple things got to hit there. First, you're right about Hatton and Jackson, who are both top 5 receivers in Big Sky play, getting past safeties. The caveat I'm going to throw, Hatton also has shredded teams down the middle. He's former tight end. That is certainly a place where early in the season, most of Hatton's catches were coming from. So that's absolutely a place that if the openings are there, Schleissner's going to call those plays because we've seen Hatton be effective that way. We also know we're focusing on those 2 receivers. Idaho's receiving room, the depth chart has been a little bit decimated. So Jackson and Hatton are the guys whose numbers are definitely going to get called quite a bit. As far as Dan Hawkins, this is another example of, again, like comparing to Sacramento State, Dan Hawkins is not going to underestimate Idaho the way Bobby Houck and Montana did. So you're right that part of what feels weird about talking about this game is for so many years, the coaching matchup was brain dead in favor of UC Davis. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think this is now an interesting coaching matchup of 2 guys who definitely know what they're doing, 2 guys who've proven they can be successful, 2 guys who've proven they can be creative and flexible with the game plan, heading into Saturday. But I guess, look, listeners probably picking this up tonally. I know UC Davis is not – look, UC Davis is a talented team, no question. There's a reason they're fringe playoff. But I think quality-wise, I don't think of Idaho as fringe playoff. I think of Idaho as quality we've seen from the Vandals, being the type of team that if they don't lose the game with rough defensive outing early, because this is, look, UC Davis is a team. If we get a defensive effort in the first half, like Idaho had against Northern Colorado and Portland State, Idaho could lose this game in the first half. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily. And I also don't think that Idaho is really outmatched in any specific area. In the comment thread, gotta hit this up really quick. Tom Kendall brought this up. Chavez, Ricardo Chavez, kicker for Idaho, looking like he may have gotten himself recalibrated against Eastern, going 2 for 2. That could matter because Davis can put points up on the board, and because these are both two solid teams. Special teams very well could be one of the deciding factors in these games. Last season, UC Davis essentially swept special teams awards minus kick return, punt return, but it's not the same dudes back this season. So I guess the thing I keep circling around, Dallas, so back to you, is I know Davis is good. I know Idaho has to play well to beat Davis. I thoroughly expect Idaho should be the team that on paper you got is picked as the team as the favorite for this game. I know Sagarin has Davis and Idaho virtually identical. Idaho's 102, Davis is 104. But I've just seen Idaho actually pick up a win against a good team, and then had a close loss against Sacramento State. But I know that circles back to how much do you value good losses. Davis has a couple good losses, no good wins. Idaho has a good win, and then some close losses as well.
One thing I do want to point out, and I'm apologizing if I butcher your name, Gary Grabout in the comment section mentioning that Teddy Buchanan was hurt and is back now. So one thing that we should point out is Teddy Buchanan is a phenomenal linebacker. He is probably going to end up with all Big Sky honors at some point in his career. He was a freshman last year that led UC Davis in tackles. He missed 3 games this year. He does look to be back. So that is never a good sign when, again, the team that you're playing is starting to get some of their better players back. But Brian, I feel the same way here. Maybe I'd feel differently if this game was in California, but knowing that this is Idaho's senior night, knowing that Idaho has apparently broken the curse of big win, awful letdown loss, big win, awful letdown loss. Now that there's a new staff in place turning this program around, it just doesn't feel like this is a letdown loss. It feels like this is a season where everything is just clicking and connecting for Idaho. Idaho needs this win. Obviously, both teams need this win. Idaho needs this win to lock in playoffs. There's some speculation out there that just because of the way that the bubble is looking this year, 7 wins might not guarantee you a shot into the title or a shot into the chance of the title, excuse me. So 7 wins and a loss to UC Davis 2 weeks to go, not so great. 8 wins and your only loss in conference is a 3-point loss to Sac State. That is huge for a playoff resume if you're Idaho trying to either get a bye if something crazy happens, or if you're trying to get a home game, you're just trying to get into the dance. This just feels, Brian, it's weird. It's weird to have that gut feeling, but this feels like a game that Idaho's just going to win. Idaho hasn't played a fully bad game. There have been some tough halves. Sean Kramer mentioning it in the comment section. Has there been a single game this year where we just didn't play well? Certainly we've had some halves and quarters that were rough, but a bad first half has typically meant a good second half to get back into it. This is the best home team that best team we're going to play in the Kibbe Dome this year. Playoffs notwithstanding, if there is a home playoff game, but this just feels, Brian, to me like this is the point when Idaho's going to put it all together, come out and just definitively shut the door and say, look, we are a playoff team. People need to be terrified of us in December.
Well, a different way to say that, Dallas, is Idaho this season, when they've had some of their bigger challenges, Idaho's had one game where there was a little bit of a letdown, and I don't even know if you'd call Sacramento State a letdown, because that's just a good team. No one this year has beat Sacramento State. but Idaho's been challenged quite a bit this season, and they've shown up every game, whether you're talking about WSU, University of Indiana University, beating Montana. 3 out of 4 times, Idaho's had pretty dang good showings for the majority of the game. So Idaho being up for this game, not really a concern. And this is again just a weird place to be relative to the last forever as an Idaho fan. Is we're hitting this game means a shit ton. I mean, both of these teams have UC Davis for sure. If Davis doesn't win out, they're not going to make the playoffs at the end. For Idaho, it's finally getting over the hump of making the playoffs and potentially playing for seeding. You're right about 8 wins. We're not worried whatsoever. 7 wins, Idaho's probably in, but there's a little bit of anxiety that last week of the season. Idaho hasn't had a game that meant this much to me in the Kibbie Dome. Well, other than just every other game this season has meant a lot for Idaho as far as picking up wins to get to the playoffs. But now this is itself like a mini playoff game of both teams are good. Both teams have real stakes. Idaho not only can push its season forward, but it can absolutely end UC Davis's shot at the playoffs. You'd have to expect that for Idaho, this is one of the games where execution probably isn't. You have to think this is not going to be a game where execution ebbs and flows like it does against Northern Colorado or Portland State, where you can understand a team playing very well overlooks certain aspects more than they really can. Davis isn't the kind of team you're going to be overlooking, especially on a 4-game winning streak where Davis truly does have momentum. And offensively, Davis has been able to bury teams kind of like Idaho has when Idaho's been playing not as great teams. But look, whenever we get to score predictions, I just don't know how to stress. I don't feel anxious about this game, guys. I'm stoked for this game, but I feel like going to the Kibbie Dome, there's a good chance, Dallas, that this is all Idaho home games have been celebrations this year. So if you haven't been to a home game and you can, guys, you got to get to this one. The environment at Eastern was the best it's been the entire season. It keeps getting better. Idaho's been answering the call when they need to. This just seems like kind of the big one where Idaho State's a dumpster fire next week. We'll hit that later. This is a big game, and these are guys who've answered the call just about the entire season.
You heard it here, folks. That's Dallas Downer and Bummer Brian giving the kiss of death to this Idaho team. Both of us saying we have no anxiety and no fear about this UC Davis team, which inevitably means this is going to be when Idaho finally turns back into the Vandals that we've all known for 25 years and falls flat on their faces. I might be trying to say that to reverse jinx this, because now I'm really starting to get a little bit nervous that Brian and I are not that concerned about this game. Brian, we're about at that 40-minute mark. I don't know a whole lot that I missed on. Is there anything you wanted to bring up before we get into score predictions?
No, man, other than to say, look in the comment thread, Tom Kendall just hit on this. Good to see UC Davis folks here. Says the TAT exposure is real. It's always fun. Davis has been a fan base that does tune in, partially because apparently they think we're not complete morons when talking about UC Davis, which, hey, that's okay. I'll take it. No, man, I think it's just time, man. This is, to me, honestly, the setting of this game is what matters the most to me. It's a celebration, like all Idaho games have been. Idaho gets to have senior night. Senior night for the dudes who made it through the Paul Petrino time and get to have this final season where it's been fun as hell. Idaho's been the type of team that Vandals wanted to see when the drop down took place. It's finally here. And closing the home season with what would be the Montana win was huge, but beating UC Davis to slam the playoff door, we'll keep playoff door open and slam it shut for Davis. Can't imagine a better way for the seniors to go out other than to maybe be able to have another playoff game.
Yeah, I completely agree, Brian. Again, like I was saying earlier, this just feels like this is the moment that Idaho slams the door shut on this and signs off on this playoff resume. Again, you beat Montana when they were number 3. You lost to Sac State when they were number 2 just by 3 and realistically had every chance at winning that game. You beat UC Davis, who's again on the playoff bubble right now. you've locked yourself into a pretty damn good resume. This feels like this is going to be it, man. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I definitely think UC Davis is a very good team. And if Idaho comes out the way that they came out in the first half against Portland State or against Northern Colorado, we might be having a different conversation after the game than the conversation we're currently having. But it does not feel like it's going to be one of those first half letdowns.
So to hit the comment section real quick before we get our score predictions, Dallas. Sean Kramer says 38-21 Idaho. Bart Holt says 41-28 Idaho. Andrew Townsend says 44-20 Idaho. Colin Scott Hughes, one of our best and brightest, he says Idaho 38-31. We've got Jason Mayer 38-22 Idaho. Kurt Borchardt 41-20 Idaho. You can see the theme here. Our listeners are pretty big on saying Idaho's going to win this game. I think, Dallas, you're right that if you want to look at previous Idaho games, I think we're going to see a score more in line with Idaho beating Montana 30-23, or when Idaho lost to Sac State, it was 31-28. I think that's probably the margin that we're a little bit closer to. I'm going to go Idaho. I think Idaho wins this 38-24.
I did it again, man. I'm just struggling. I got to stop using the StreamYard mute, and not to get into another mute button discussion, but goddamn, I'm sorry. I'm just struggling tonight. Anyways, Tom Kendall saying the same thing, 38-27 Vandals. Andrew Townsend saying that Duffer's Tavern's got the Vandals as 16.5 point favorites. Brian, my score prediction is pretty close to yours. I don't think it's going to be a 16-point game. I think this is a touchdown game. I'm going to go Idaho 35-28.
Okay, and did producer seducer Martin Heemstra, did he leave a score prediction?
He did. He's got Idaho 40-30. So we're all roughly in that same ballpark of thinking Idaho's a touchdown to 2 touchdowns, somewhere in that general area. Again, all of us thinking Idaho won't win this by a blowout, but should be fairly comfortable in the victory. With that said, it's time to hear a little bit about our favorite sponsor, our only sponsor, but that doesn't mean that they're not our favorite. If you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, do not look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway, and check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the entire country. Just bring your clothes and let HRE handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call now at 800-262-1882. Again, that's 800-262-1882, or check them out at hughesriver.com. Brian, do you have any last thoughts on UC Davis before we get into picking the rest of the Big Sky?
No, man. I think it is kind of weird for Davis to be we're this deep into the season, and we're not yet clear on who UC Davis is, just based off the results that we already covered in this game. I don't think there's another team in the Big Sky that you'd exactly say that where we're this far into the season. But I think it is fair to say for Vandals heading into this game, Davis doesn't have any no-show games this season. So I expect we're at the very least going to get a solid outing from Davis, meaning Idaho's going to have to play well. But Idaho this year has been pretty good at playing well. So that's all I got, man, other than get to the Dome. Last night, Eastern, which was not last night. The Eastern game is the first time this year. I'm a cheap bastard. I bought the general admission tickets because my math was until Idaho proves I need to buy the expensive tickets, I'm going to buy general admission tickets and sit wherever the hell I want to. Eastern was the first game that I could just not sit wherever the hell I want to, which is great news. Maybe my gamble changes for next season. Please, dudes, get to the Dome. The environment was fun as hell. It was Parents Weekend last week, which partially explains some of the fan base, some of maybe more attentive fan base. We have one last game, guys. This has been the season is fun as hell. But it goes by in a blink. And look, if things work out, we don't need to talk about Idaho's future. The present is right now. Idaho could make the playoffs with a win essentially make the playoffs with a win on Saturday. This is a playoff type game for Idaho. If you can get there, please get there.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. This is a playoff game for the Vandals. If they win this game, I mean, a nuclear bomb would have to drop in Pocatello for Idaho to lose that game. So realistically, you win this game and you're going to the playoffs, hopefully with a shot at having another home game. But that's not guaranteed. If you are at all interested in this team and interested in getting to the Dome and seeing what Vandal football is becoming, this is your last chance. I have had more fun this season than any other season since the drop down, and honestly, since a while before that. This feels like the rebirth of Vandal football. The bullies of the Big Sky are back. Get to the Dome, have a blast. Brian and I have been there and watched some really awful games with very few people in attendance. And now you see the fruits of this season, finally getting almost 12,000 people in there for that Eastern game. Let's try to do that again this weekend. Get to the Dome, have a bunch of fun, scream your ass off, and let's beat those Aggies. Let's beat Dan Hawkins for the first time, because I really want to punch Dan Hawkins in the head. Not personally. I'm sure he's a decent enough person, but metaphorically, I just want to punch him and his kid right in the head and finally get one back for Idaho. Brian, enough of my loud rambling. Picking the Big Sky. Let's get into it. Let's talk about UC Davis's biggest rival, Sac State, at top 5 Portland State. This game is on Friday, not on Saturday.
I'm not concerned about Portland State pulling an upset here. Sacramento State is too effective on the ground. Sacramento State's also just solid all around. They've got a couple guys who are making final pushes for all Big Sky nomination, which that brings up my quick bullet point. This week on Big Sky Podcast Power Rankings, we're actually going to do some of our Big Sky awards a week before the Big Sky releases theirs, so we can compare, which is a not important or interesting way of saying, yeah, Sacramento State's going to win this game. Sacramento State's also looking for style points, but dudes are undefeated. They're in the market for a number 1 or number 2 seed, so they have playoffs kind of as well in a different way. And look, Troy Taylor is never underprepared. And Portland State, look, they got their win against Eastern. They're done.
Yeah, I mean, guys, this game, they shouldn't even play this game. They should just call this game. Everybody in the comment section, Cap Dan saying Sac State by 3 touchdowns. Bart Holt, 51-15 Sac State. Steve Kurtz, Sac State by 40. Tom Kendall, top 5 PSU 10 to Sac State's 52. This game is not going to be close. Sac State is the cream of the crop in this conference. And while Idaho is right on their heels, Portland State sure as hell is not.
Well, wait, hey, maybe we're wrong, though. Portland State's got some momentum. I forgot. They got their win over Eastern. But very impressive 35-21 win for Portland State over Northern Colorado. Northern Colorado, look, we talk about Portland State being top 5. Because they are top 5, so big deal for Sac State to get top 5 win. Under a point people don't pay enough attention to, Northern Colorado is a top 2 northern directional school in the Big Sky. So a big win like that last week, maybe it gives Portland State the momentum to make this a game. No, obviously it doesn't. Sacramento State's going to win easy.
And Brian, leading us into our next game, the directional showdown. Northern Colorado versus Northern Arizona. Which fan base cares less?
Does this make you miss the old directional showdown of Southern Utah and Northern Colorado?
Yes, it absolutely does.
It absolutely does to me too. So I'm going to pick Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona just had a pretty good showing last week against Montana State. That game was in doubt until the very end. 3-point win for Montana State last week. It's more that Northern Arizona they have the ability to be effective. There's some talent there. It's just the team more or less puts it together against shitty teams. So like the new Portland State. where for the most part, they'll look good against shitty teams. They'll have like a game against a better team where they look surprisingly effective. And Northern Colorado, that's just one of the rougher stories to me in the Big Sky. Like the discussion of what's the ugliest story going on in the Big Sky, what's the roughest fan base to be a part of in the Big Sky. Like you can understand Cal Poly, there's still belief that Bo Baldwin just needed time. You can understand Idaho State choosing to check out because it's year one. It's rough, but maybe Regal's the right guy. Northern Colorado fans are pretty much done with Ed McCaffrey. So that's another place where I don't see this team coming together. They're certainly not going to outcoach anyone. So Northern Arizona.
I feel real bad for those 24 Northern Colorado fans that are done with their head coach, because what are 24 people going to do against a former NFL star? You're not getting that guy out of there anytime soon. But no, NAU, and I don't mean this to be any of the comparisons that Scott Frost ended up being this year, where he made a whole bunch of really stupid coaching decisions that resulted in him getting fired very shortly before he wasn't going to be due a whole bunch of money. Nebraska hated him so much they were just trying to get rid of him. NAU feels kind of like those Nebraska Scott Frost teams, for anybody that follows the FBS too much. For every game that they beat Sam Houston somehow 10-3, I still don't understand that. They lost to North Dakota by 3 when North Dakota was number 22 in the nation. They just lost to Montana State 41-38 in a game that realistically they could have won. But then they host Cal Poly and they win 31-29. Like this is a team that just they seem to get up for good teams, and then they also play down to bad teams. I've seen that before. However, with that said, Northern Colorado is complete butt cheeks, and there's no way that NAU is going to lose to that team. And Northern Colorado is a dumpster fire. They're going to be a dumpster fire until the McCaffrey family's gone. Everybody else in the comment thread feeling the same way. We've got Colin Hughes shouting out, and Colin, I'm sorry, I missed your prediction of 48-9 for Sac State over Portland State. Colin Hughes, 42-24 NAU. Steve Kurtz, NAU 21. NAU 28, Northern Colorado 21. Jason Mayer, Lumberjacks by 21. Bart Holt, 35-15 NAU. Tom Kendall, 37-24 NAU. Pretty much everybody picking NAU Turner Webb, 35-24 for NAU versus nepotism, which, hey, that's a pretty good score for a team that is very familiar with nepotism. Everybody in here saying the same thing. NAU's got this one in the bag. So let's just move on to another one that everybody's got probably in the bag. Idaho State at Weber State.
Charlie Ragle, man, if you guys have not read Charlie Ragle's quotes after Idaho State lost, was it 55-3 to UC Davis last week? Idaho State scored, they kick a field goal on their first drive, and then it's all Davis all the time. Ragle claims he's only going to bring 40 or 50 dudes to Weber. Ragle sounds like he is kind of done on this season, but in a way, he truly, you got to read Greg Wood's article. Just Google Charlie Ragle press conference. You'll see Charlie Ragle more or less put the entire roster on notice. Said, this is a paraphrase because I didn't look it up. Some of the guys are going to be gone next year because they're seniors. The rest of the guys are going to be gone because they're not on this football team anymore. Ragle making it clear that he wants to change. He wants to change the culture of Idaho State, and he is just done with where it's at. And he went with the scorched earth version, going public, which there's some ways where that seems a little bit old school in the way it might backfire, but also I completely understand if he truly thinks the issue is not scheme, he thinks it's heart. It makes sense to say, okay, well, the line in the sand is drawn. We're doing this now. Weber is going to walk all over Idaho State. Weber's offense has certainly been fading the second half of the season for sure. But, even Weber's losses this year, as of late, close loss to Sacramento State, close loss to Montana State, both those games where special teams essentially lost the game for Weber. Yeah, that's not going to be the case here. Weber's going to win like 42-3.
Yeah, this isn't going to be close, guys. And I might be in the absolute minority here, but I actually don't mind Charlie Ragle's comments. I think Pocatello is a complete shithole. I think that the administration at that excuse for a university is even worse. I think what his comments are, they're probably blown out of proportion from what he's truly thinking deep down. Probably because he's a little emotional at the fact that this is this is probably the hardest job in college football. I can't think of another place I would rather be than anywhere but Pocatello. That is an awful program. It's been awful for decades. No amount of turnover is really going to fix a whole lot until you just go scorched earth, which is what Ragel is doing. All of that to say, they're going to get absolutely dismantled by Weber State, because even if he brought a full contingent of players, the players they have it just doesn't work over there. This is not the Idaho situation where obviously the guy in charge was a dummy. They replaced him with somebody that knew what he was doing, replaced all the coaches with guys that were probably better than the previous coaching staff. Boom, Idaho is a playoff team. Idaho State did not have that magic card of let's change the coach out and make everything better. This is a program that has to be burned down to the studs to be rebuilt.
I just want to hit that for 1 second, because Ragel right now is the only interesting part about Idaho State. And I'm mostly with you. And I think, look, a lot of the reaction that I saw, and from people I talked to, the reaction to Charlie Ragel's quotes, it was twofold. It was that direct frustration putting it on the players. You can understand how a potential athlete could come across that who's being recruited by Idaho State, and maybe that makes them think twice about coming to Idaho State. That was the only thing that people were really concerned about with Ragel's quotes. I gotta say, like what you said, I mostly took it as the dude was just being direct. And Ragel will probably, if he's in recruits' rooms and these are brought up, he's going to tell them, this is me being a straight shooter, guys. You don't have to interpret my words. You'll know where you stand. So if that's something you want, come to Idaho State. I expect that's the route he's going to go. When I talked to him on media day, he did seem, relatively speaking, like a straight shooter in a way that was endearing to me. I mean, I've been rooting for Ragel this year. I'm not saying I put a lot of investment in it, because why would you? But that's the only direction with Idaho State right now, in my mind, worth kind of paying attention to. So I suppose we can stop the Idaho State talk now.
Oh, just one last thing about Idaho State for anybody that is casually listening to us, or anybody that just doesn't care about little brother in Pocatello. The Bengals won the Big Sky in 2002. They went above 500 in 2003, in 2014, and 2018. Other than that, it has been a losing season every year for the last 20 years, minus those three. So pretty rough times down there in Pocatello. I do want to point out, because I'm doing a terrible job at seducing. Martin called out Weber as the win. He also picked Sac State, but contrary to Brian and I, he picked UNC at home against NAU, which it is in the formerly long grass of Greeley, Colorado. So there is a chance for UNC. This is a reputation staker for Martin here. I am shocked at that call, but more power to him if he gets it right. That gets into another game that Martin is going to pick differently from the two of us. Eastern Washington at Montana. Obviously, Martin has picked Eastern Washington.
Of course, Martin did that, and you have to applaud Martin's faith in him being rewarded more than once for picking against Montana. Oh, he's been rewarded more than once, but Montana just beat Cal Poly 57-0. And yes, Cal Poly sucks. Eastern is closer to Cal Poly right now than you might guess. Like that 17-10 win for Eastern over Cal Poly earlier in the year, I don't think that was the result of a weird game. I think truly those teams are not that far from each other. Eastern clearly better, but not by the margin you'd expect. So no, Montana's going to walk all over Eastern. The thing for, I'm honestly, Dallas, a little bit anxious for Eastern. I like the Big Sky with Eastern being a good team. And from what I saw in Moscow, Eastern's got to get a lot of new guys. They just don't have enough right now to be competitive with the Big Sky being stronger. And the Big Sky, look, teams have to be strong defensively right now to be okay in the Big Sky. Eastern has a long ways to go.
Yeah, I'm not somebody who's ever going to call for a coach's head unless it's absolutely deserved. Like you played your kid at quarterback when he had no right to be there, and you sat here wasting an entire decade of a once proud program. Anyways, other than that, I don't typically call for coaches' heads or if they win one basketball game a year, that kind of thing. Anyways, Aaron Best, that loss felt like, holy shit. I understand why there is a small contingent of Eastern fans that want Best out of there. I have never thought there was a problem with Best. I had long wanted Aaron Best rather than Paul Petrino. I wouldn't take Aaron Best over Jason Eck, but I do think Aaron Best is at least in the top half of the coaches in the Big Sky, if not better than that. But seeing what that program might be headed towards, and I'm really sorry, Patty, if you're listening to this. Yikes. I thought that we were like looking at one down year after Barrier's gone, and then maybe they are going to, maybe Visperis is going to end up being the guy. Maybe they get a transfer in. Something's going to happen, and they're magically going to find their quarterback of the future, much the way they did with Gage Gubrud after Vernon Adams left. Jordan West stepped in, wasn't great. Very next year, everything's back to normal in Cheney. It does not feel like that. It feels like Barrier could come back in, and they would maybe get to 500. This is troubling for Eastern.
No.
All of that to say, I'm absolutely picking Montana.
Yeah, Eastern's going to need new dudes. There's like Colin Hughes in the comment section says Best won't be down for long, which look, that's a reasonable point. Just the thing I'm not going to move off of yet, not disagreeing with Colin, because look, Aaron Best is not terrible by any means. Eastern, the narrative around Eastern had been that they're losing games because they're playing great teams. And that is true. Eastern's had a very brutal schedule. That even if they were solid, there's no way this team would finish with more than 4 wins based off of 5 top 15 games in the Big Sky, or 6 if you count Portland State, plus 2 FBS games. But Eastern has actually not looked that great against the weak teams on their schedule. Tennessee State's terrible. Cal Poly's terrible. Those were 2 close wins for Eastern. And then look, Portland State sucks, and Eastern was down 35-7 to Portland State. So reason to be concerned, but we have another easy state of Montana game to pick next.
Yeah, one last point on Eastern, and I know that we're running long here. Next year's schedule does look a whole lot better for them. They do get to play Idaho State. They play Portland State. They play Cal Poly. They play NAU. They have a little bit better schedule next year. So if Aaron Best is still around, which I would assume he is.
He will be.
It certainly looks like they will not be where they are currently at. So anybody that is terribly concerned or likes having Eastern be that kind of not national brand, but the red field is at least known enough across the FCS. If people like having somebody in the Big Sky that does draw a little bit of attention to us, hopefully Eastern's a little bit better next year. That gets us into the last game, Brian. Montana State at Cal Poly.
Well, Cal Poly just lost, but 56-0 to Montana. And Montana State just played their game where they underperformed against Northern Arizona, came away with a win. Montana State is going to use this game to get themselves right heading into the Brawl of the Wild against Montana to close the season. This will not be close. I would not be floored if we have another 56-0 repeat. Montana State.
Yeah, this is the tune-up game of all tune-up games. If you're Montana State, you don't have necessarily an incredible win on your resume, and you may have more questions than answers at this point, even though, again, you're on track to go undefeated, undefeated in conference. With all of that said, look, you're still going to win the Big Sky if you win out. Like, this is obviously a team that these are, rich problems to be having. But there are some questions about Montana State, and especially as they have let teams hang around for longer than they should. This is the kind of game that they're going to go out there and absolutely just rip Cal Poly to shreds to get prepared for Brawl of the Wild and then hit the road for the playoffs or home for the playoffs, however the rest of the season ends up for them. This is absolutely the tune-up game to end all tune-up games.
Comment thread agrees. Comment thread is there's no one picking Montana State to score fewer than 45 points. That's Steve Kurtz picking a 45-0 Montana State win. Everyone else, we got guys like Colin Hughes, 58-3 Montana State. Tom Kendall, 55-14 Montana State. Bart Holt, 63-7 Montana State.
And again, because I'm doing a terrible job of producing and seducing, same thing for Montana Eastern. Everybody's picking giant blowouts of Eastern in that game. Another rough week of games here in the Big Sky. Just the haves playing the have-nots in pretty much every game except for Idaho UC Davis. So, Brian, that takes us through picking the Big Sky. We don't have a Martin minute, but what I do want to bring attention to, Idaho basketball still sucks. That's all I got. The women should be fine because they lost to a Power 5 school. That's expected. Idaho men's basketball still sucks.
Yeah, Idaho men, real quick, lost season opener, D1 opener at Denver, 68-63. Leading scorers Isaac Jones, center Isaac Jones scores 15 points, grabs 5 rebounds, shoots 6 of 9. My takeaway, Isaac Jones scores 15 points on 9 shots. He needs to get a lot more shots. Number 2 scores Taryn Frank, another newcomer, 4-12 for 11 points. Devontae Moffitt chipped in 10. Idaho has more games. This is as in depth as we're going to talk about Idaho basketball during football season.
Brian, wouldn't it be nice if, there was a coach that could figure out, oh yeah, Isaac Jones is really good. He should get some more shots. Maybe if we get him some more touches around the basket, maybe that will make things a little bit easier for 3-point shooters. But what the hell do I know? We're going to stop talking about basketball because unfortunately we have to do that shit in a couple months anyways. Other thing I want to call out, unfortunately, the Vandal women's soccer team, their season has come to a close. They lost on a shootout 0-0 draw at the end of regulation and overtime to NAU, the 1 seed, versus the 2 seed Idaho Vandals. NAU moving on to the NCAA tournament. Idaho season, unfortunately, coming to a close there. I do have one last thing I want to bring up, Brian, but did you have any other sports you wanted to quickly speak about? That a head nod is a no. So what I want to call out is the 2022 Vandal Athletics Hall of Fame class. They were mentioned, and there was a quick little ceremony for them during the football game. I believe there was another ceremony also over at the Best Western. 6 different Vandal legends plus 1 full team have all been inducted into the Vandal Athletics Hall of Fame. That ranges from the 2005 women's cross country team to Barry Steele. He was an administrator with Idaho for 25 some years. Mike Iupati, former Vandal great, the best player on the 2009 Humanitarian Bowl, one of the few Vandals not just drafted into the NFL, but a first-round pick. Unfortunately, played for every single NFC West team except my own, which was a bit of a kick in the nuts, but I got around it. Hannah Kaiser, former track and field cross-country superstar. Red Morrison, former men's basketball coach. John L. Smith, one of the greatest football coaches of all time, as well as Haley Janicek, an absolute stud on the volleyball team back in the day.
Yeah, John L. Smith, in his 6 years at Idaho, goes 53-21, 5 playoff appearances in 6 years. Dwight Red Morrison played in the NBA for 5 years, from 1954 to 1959. But want to spend just a minute on Haley Janicek. Haley Janicek, wife of a longtime Tubbs patron Matthew Janicek. In Haley's career as a Vandal, she also played volleyball right around the time I went to school to University of Idaho. But in Haley's time as a volleyball player for the Vandals, she's a 4-year starter. Good Lord. She holds the school record for career kills in 1,775, career double kill matches 87, single match kills 36. She's top 10 in 6 other statistical categories. So just was good for every single year of your career. Also earned honors. Now, this was back when Idaho's in the WAC. 2005 all freshman team, 2005, 2006, second team all conference, 2007, 2008, first team all conference, player of the week in 05, 07, and 08. And was also for 3 different years academic all WAC. So she coached for a couple years after she was done playing at Austin Peay. As an interim coach, she led Austin Peay to their first conference championship and appearance in the NCAA tournament. Was named a top 30 coach under 30 by the American Volleyball Coaches Association. She is a former coach, but again, man, part of the Tubbs. She's part of the Tubbs family. So thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matthew, for being a patron. Congrats, Haley, for the being honored the way most Vandals don't get to be honored. It's a big deal.
Yeah, just congrats to all of the 2002, or excuse me, oh boy, 2002. I mean, congrats to the 2002 class as well, but congrats to the 2022 class getting into the Vandal Athletics Hall of Fame. Pretty cool stuff. It's always cool to see some of the guys like Red Morrison. I doubt there's a whole lot of living Vandals that truly know much about him just because it's been so long. But then you have the folks like Iupati and Kaiser and Janicek that did play in more of a contemporary. You and I were in school and those guys were there. It's just cool to see the school celebrate some fresh faces and some old faces.
Also, a quick reminder from Colin Hughes in the comment thread, Haley had a fantastic speech as well. So again, congrats from the Tubbs family to the Tubbs family. All
right, Brian, we are well over an hour. We're closing in on an hour 15 at this point. do you have any final thoughts before we move on?
No, I'm just looking forward to your outro.
I'm looking forward to my outro too. I haven't even figured it out. That was supposed to be you filibustering me for 4 minutes while I figured it out. But I guess we're just going to do this on the fly here, guys. So, down with Dan Hawkins, V's up, get to the Dome, support this football team as they're trying to win what is essentially a playoff game. This is your last chance to get to the Dome. Don't listen to us. Don't listen to other people. Don't listen to anybody that's saying, hey, there's a chance that Idaho's got a home playoff game. Do not treat it like that. If you want to see this team, which is right now, honestly, this could end up being something like the 2009 bowl team or the 2016 bowl team, where it's one glimpse of greatness surrounded by sadness. Who knows what next year's going to bring? We're hoping that's not the case. I don't think that could ever happen with a Jason Eck coach team, but there is a chance that this is just like every other good year that Idaho has, and it's surrounded by a decade of sadness on each end. Do not miss your chance to see this team. This team is fun. The Dome is fun. It fucking rocks to be a Vandal right now, as long as you don't pay attention to the men's basketball team. Players are great. The coach is not. We'll get into that. Brian.
No, I'm just laughing my ass off at no, you're right. People need to get to the game. Like, the team's good now. You need to enjoy them now. But I just love the tone of, you guys, everything could suck forever, but it's kind of cool right now. So get there. I know where it's going from. I know what you're saying. I'm not anxious about that in the future. I just don't care about the future right now. It's fun right now, dude. The team kicks ass. Get there now because you can. Motherfucker. Jesus Christ. Motherfucker. Jesus Christ. That's an unbelievable fuck up. 2 minutes of muted talk. We're gonna start. Oh man, we're just gonna start that over. Good Lord.